Welcome, everybody. This is Heather with the New England Museum Association. I'm just going to wait another minute or two so we can get everybody on board. We actually had quite a few registrations today, so I'm going to just wait another minute or two before we actually start the full lunch with NEMA. And I see you guys have found the chat feature, which is awesome.
So nice to see people reporting in from all over the place.
Okay, it looks like we have a pretty good number right now of people that are joining again. This is Heather with the New England Museum Association. I'm the Communications and Operations Manager here at NEMA, and I'm in charge of the Lunch with NEMA. And just to let you guys know a little bit more about NEMA, because I know we have a lot of members joining us today from outside the region. We are a professional development organization, and we have spring summer workshops, so make sure you join us for that. We're in the middle of those. We also have a conference in November that will be in Boston and Cambridge. Make sure to join us on that one. It will be the museum event of the year, so we like to say. Just to get started a little bit, this is the Lunch with NEMA for April on Creativity in Museum Practice with Linda Norris and Rainey Tisdale, co-authors of Creativity and Museum Practice. And today's lunch is sponsored by Museum Trek from Trek Solver. And I should start speaking a little louder. Thank you, Pamela. As you guys have noticed, we do have the chat feature right there. If you guys have any questions at all, make sure to write the question in, and Linda or Rainey will stop each other and actually ask those questions. So we do have the participation on that one, and also to let you know that we will be recording the session. So now we will get on to the actual session. Let me introduce you to Linda and Rainey. Both are independent museum consultants and have been Fulbright Scholars. Rainey has gone to Finland and Linda to the Ukraine. In 2004, Rainey was serving as the project coordinator for the Boston Better Project, and Linda is developing training opportunities for context travel and working with the Harriet Beecher Stowe House on their reinterpretation efforts. And I'm going to let you guys go for it, and we'll switch it over to the quick survey.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, everybody. And this is Linda, so you'll hear two different voices. Rainey, we sound differently, so hopefully you'll recognize us.
Hi, I'm Rainey. This is what I sound like.
See, there you go. We'd love it if you'd go ahead and start taking this quick 3-question survey to help us think about what we're going to do in our next hour today. So just start clicking away at the answers. And over the next hour, Rainey and I are going to give you a small taste of our new book, Creativity in Museum Practice. We'll have a couple things for you to do during the webinar. You get to work in addition to listen a little bit, we hope in a fun way. And of course, please share your questions in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. And Heather, I can't see that people are taking the survey now. I'm going to ask about that.
People are. We're at 73 out of 82%.
Oh, do I have to take the survey to see the results?
You should be seeing them as they come in. It's interesting that you're not. So I can tell you what the results are right now. Do you consider yourself creative? 83 of you guys said yes. I'm not sure about those 3%, but no. Do you consider your museum creative? 53% said yes, and 27% said no. And have you read Creativity in Museum Practice? 5% have yes, and 79% said no.
Okay, that's great because that's really helpful for us. One of the things we wanted to do in that survey was really to get a sense about who'd read the book and who hadn't, so we made sure that we hit all of your interests. It looks like a lot of you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but you may have come across it, and we're super glad that you've joined us. Since we don't have time to cover all of the book in our hour, we're going to focus on the first half about individual creativity and building creative cultures at work. But if you like what you hear, we of course encourage you to check out the rest of the book to dig deeper. And in whatever case, please ask questions in the chat room. I see somebody has a question about not seeing visuals and the clicking sound, so we'll attempt to address those. But the way we think about the book is part manifesto and part toolkit. We try and think about why museums need to be creative and why all of us who work in and with museums need to be creative. But then also provide a lot of strategies and tools, including try thises, which are low or no cost activities you can give a try to make you and yourself and your museum more creative. Plus, it has lots of stories from our colleagues in the field who were tremendously generous in sharing stories of their own work. So we'll be sharing some of those as well as we move along today. So all around us, in every kind of museum, we're surrounded by creativity, whether it's the genius of ancient Rome or how to build a better milking machine. Creative efforts are all around us. Over the past 10 years, there's been an incredible explosion of new research and thinking in society at large and in the for-profit world about creativity. We wrote this book because we wanted to make sure that this new thinking reached our field, reached the museum field. Because it's not just that museums are keepers of the world's past creativity. That's not enough. We have an essential role to play in nurturing creativity in our current audiences. But in order to take on that role, we first have to understand and embrace creativity ourselves, really, and embrace it in our work and in our institutions.
So with that intro, we're going to start with a few key points in creativity theory just to build a foundation for you for the concepts we're going to discuss throughout the hour. And in starting that, sort of creativity theory, this is just some quick hits. I want 3 misconceptions that people commonly have about creativity. And the first one is that, a lot of people think creativity is a gift. You're either born with it or not born with it. But in fact, the creativity researchers all agree that anyone can be creative. And in fact, it's great to see in our poll results from today that 83% of you are identifying as creative people because, really, as humans, our brains are wired for creativity. We all have that potential. And so that's an important thing for everybody to be clear on. And then another common misconception, a lot of people think that creativity is about artistic creativity, and yes, certainly that is one part of creativity, but it's really bigger than that. Creativity is about coming up with new, useful ideas in any field. There are many ways to be creative besides using a paintbrush or a musical instrument. So creative problem solving is something that's important in many kinds of work. Physicists need creativity. Social workers need creativity. We all do. And related to this, it's really important to point out that creativity is important in every facet of museum work. It's not just exhibition designers who need to be creative. Think about, maybe your museum needs a creative approach to fundraising. I'm sure we could all use more of that, right? Or there's some entrenched visitor services problem at your museum that needs some sort of creative solution. Or even collections management. Maybe your processes need a look with fresh eyes. So across your museum, there's room for creativity. And, it's interesting to see in our poll from today that 53% of you said your museum was creative. And, so our philosophy really with this is that if each person at your museum is working on their own creativity first, and then you apply the tools and techniques of creativity to whole departments and teams, then you can build this entire creative culture across your institution. And that in turn fuels creativity for your visitors as well. So then suddenly, if we're all doing that across the field, we can start to build an entire creative society together. And that's sort of the end goal. And if we move on to the last misconception, again, many people think creativity is a gift, but it's actually a practice. We're all born with creative potential, but we have to practice creativity if we want to realize that potential. And practicing creativity is like practicing writing or practicing riding a bike or reading or any of those things. If you put the time and effort in on a regular basis, you can master it, but you have to put in that time. You have to practice it, weave it into your daily experience. And so our goal today is to help you jumpstart that creative practice. And so recapping across those misconceptions, just to be clear, creativity is open to everyone in every field and across all facets of museum work, but it is a practice. You have to work on it every day. And another important thing we want to sort of lay the foundation for with you is about the stages of the creative process. And this is, really starting to understand how your brain works in terms of creativity. And, creativity researchers, are pretty clear at this point that there is this process that unfolds in your brain from step to step. And they disagree a little bit on the terms for the stages of the creative process, and some researchers, some psychologists think that it's 4 stages instead of 5, but they all basically agree on the fundamentals of the process. And so what we're showing you on the screen here is the version of the creative process that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi puts forward. He's one of our favorite creativity researchers. And so I'm just going to walk you through these stages to help you understand them a little bit. And so the first one is preparation. And that's where you feed your brain a lot of new information. It could be reading, exploring the world around you, looking widely for inspiration, lots of raw material to feed your brain. The second stage is incubation, and this is where your brain processes all that new information, looking for patterns and connections. And the term for this processing is associative thinking. And it happens in what we would commonly refer to as the back of our minds, just below the surface of consciousness. So in order to free your brain up for incubation, you really have to let your thoughts wander. It's what happens when you're staring out the window or you're daydreaming or you're doodling and you're not trying to focus very intently. And incubation is the least visible of the stages of creativity, and so many people don't realize how important it is. And so I want to be clear with all of you today that if you make some space for incubation in your daily routine, you can make a big improvement in your creative practice just by being intentional about that. The third stage is the most visible one, insight. So that's the light bulb going off in your head. It's that aha moment that we're all familiar with. And that's basically what's happening there, is that your brain's associative thinking makes a connection that clicks for you, and so that sort of pushes it forward to the front of your mind, and you think, okay, I get it. This is a great idea. And a lot of people think that insight is really the only part of creativity. They don't understand that there are these important things going on before the insight and after the insight. So that's an important shift to make in terms of how you think about creativity. You've had that idea. Once you've had the insight, you move on to evaluation, and that's where you're really just sort of thinking about whether the idea holds water and how you might carry it out, what would be required to make it happen, all that kind of stuff. And it may seem like this stage isn't as essential, but a lot of people, and also in fact a lot of organizations, can either be too critical at this point with evaluation or not critical enough, either of those two things, and that affects how many and which ideas actually get implemented. So if you pay some attention to how evaluation happens, you can help make sure that the best ideas really do go forward. And then lastly, there's elaboration. And this is where you actually implement the idea. And this is often an iterative process. You're tweaking as you go along. And you might find that parts of the idea really are compelling when you start working on it and other parts aren't, that you need to shift and change. You know, you might be experimenting as you go or tinkering with something. And so that can, and that implementation process that happens during elaboration, it can be very quick, or it can be take a very long time, depending on what the idea is and what's required to carry it out. So what we're really hoping you'll do is over the coming weeks start to notice when you're cycling through these stages, and also when you're at work how your teams are cycling through them, and then you can start to be a little bit more intentional about making the space and the the elements that you need, putting in place the elements that you need to support these stages so that you can cycle through them more effectively.
Okay, so we're going to start building from that foundation. We want to share 10 things you can do right now to jumpstart you and your organization's creative practice. So here's the first one, Twyla Tharp's Creative Inventory. The choreographer Twyla Tharp has written a great book. If you went to art school, you may have come across it, called The Creative Habit. And she suggests that you take a creative inventory on a regular basis to find out more about your own creative practice. It's about being reflective and self-aware, which hopefully is part of the message you're getting from us today, is that that's a really great thing to be doing. And you begin to pay attention to what works and what doesn't. We include the inventory in our book, but also if you just Google Twyla Tharp Creative Inventory, you'll come up with it. But here's a couple of examples of the questions she's asked. And I'm going to ask you in the chat box, anybody who wants one, to share. Describe in the little chat box, if you want to, your first successful creative act. So I'll share one of mine as people start writing, and one I heard about from someone who shared it with me. The one I heard about was someone who had a great description of dressing up as FBI agents when they were first graders and knocking on doors in their neighborhood. So that kind of role play. One of the first creative acts I remember is the idea that when I was in a new kindergarten, I'd moved schools, and I was coloring an apple, and a little girl next to me looks at me very sternly and said, "You're doing that all wrong." And it's kind of killing, right? There's a creativity killer right there. And I just went ahead and doing it my own way. But in my head, right, I'm thinking, oh, is it wrong? So here's some other, Michelle has dictated a book to her mom called Here Comes the Electric Train. Sarah finger painted her mom's brand new sofa. I'm sure her mom still has stories. Licking and sticking marshmallows to my grandmother's dresser in a creative way. Oh, a fort builder, that's a great, the outdoor creativity I think is a really interesting kind of thing. Hosting my own gymnastics Olympics competition, small books. These are all great, tremendous stories. Wow, I see so many people coming through.
And maybe a point that we can hit home when you start to think about your first creative acts, it does go back to this idea that we all are wired for creativity and for that exploring and trying new things. And sometimes it's just, unfortunately, our society has all these ways that it cuts us off from those creative acts as we get older. And so, one of the things that we're really hoping that we can hit home for you is how to return to some of that childlike emphasis on, on creativity and exploring.
And just the sense of wonder, one of the things that also I see really interesting in you is if they is the combination of individual creativity. Some of you have taken on those kinds of things. But a lot of you have embarked on your first creative act in collective creativity as well. So I think that's interesting. So here's another question from Twyla Tharp. Does anyone in your daily life inspire you? You know, who's that person who inspires you on a regular basis? So if people want to weigh in on that one, they should feel free. Someone's kid inspires them, which I think is a great, they're the great reminder of those things that sometimes we've lost a little bit. But in all of Twyla Tharp's inventory, it is this idea that creativity is in all of us. If we think about it and if we're mindful, then we can really do amazing things.
Great, and feel free to keep those coming in the chat. We're going to move on to our second strategy. And going back to the stages of creativity, so we talked about that preparation stage where your brain needs lots of interesting, varied information in order to, feed into your, eventually your insight stage of the creative process. And if you're feeding your brain tiny portions or your brain is getting the same white rice every day, it just doesn't have much to work with. And so if you look at this photo, right, here's this guy, and he's got this bicycle, and it's just loaded down with all of these fascinating looking packages, and I'm trying to imagine what might be inside, and maybe one of them has eels, and another one has some sort of legume, and who even knows what else, maybe they're kazoos in a third, and I don't even know. But that's what you need to do with your brain, is feed it lots of interesting information. And you need to help your colleagues do the same. And let's talk about that one a little bit more, how it plays out at work. So, here are a few ideas for things that you could do starting now with your colleagues at work to increase the amount and the variety of information you're all getting. So one possibility might be establishing a day each week where you watch TED Talks during lunch. Another thing you could do is make some regular time to share what you're each reading and learning outside of work. That's sort of like an adult version of show and tell. Or another thing that we love is this idea of a curiosity club, where you're all trying to explore, sort of random paths with, a lot of ideas and interests that you sort of go down one path and see where it takes you, and then maybe that leads you to a new path, and you're all sort of trying to push out as far as you can with the things you're learning and exploring and helping each other do that. So maybe in the chat window, does anyone have, examples that your museum is already doing some of those things to actively help each other learn? We'd love to see those in the chat window if you have examples of that.
Oh, so I have to say, Sarah's mentioned Yammer, which is like Facebook for work. So that's actually something I don't know. I'm going to be checking out Yammer. Somebody else goes to other museums together. Great, all kinds of different ways. So there's a concept with tutorial creativity, which is about combining elements from completely different fields or areas of thought to create new ideas. When you think about things that are mashups, it's another word. This is related to varying your information, and it's one of the big reasons we're experiencing such an explosion of creativity in society at large right now, because the information revolution, and in particularly the internet, has allowed cross-pollination from field to field in such a dramatically expanded way. And so I just want to share one of the stories in the book from one of our colleagues, Ellen Rosenthal, who's the CEO at Conner Prairie Museum, the outdoor museum in Indiana. And the Price of Right image you're looking at is actually from that. Their museum was struggling with finances, right, like everybody, and particularly struggling in getting a large staff to understand that there are choices in any budget process, and that they're tough choices, and there's a lot of weighing and balancing. One of her staff came up with the idea of hosting in a staff meeting a Price is Right so that people understood really what it cost to buy paper towels for all of Conner Prairie for a year, or to run a small display ad in a local newspaper. So they took an idea from somewhere you would never think, Price is Right, and kind of mashed it up with their own needs and created something that actually really helped the staff to understand. Another example, actually just from a guest post on my own blog, the Uncatalogued Museum, just this morning. Trevor Jones, who's head of collections and exhibitions at the Kentucky Historical Society, writes about how a trip to the Toyota manufacturing plant in Kentucky helped he and his staff rethink how they do prototyping, but also how they think about problem solving and how it affects everybody up along the line. So that kind of thinking outside, looking from outside our own little universe, is really important. So if anybody else has ideas about other places they've looked to for inspiration, please keep sharing those in the chat room, but we'll keep moving along.
Our fourth strategy is deep observation. So this is key to creativity because it helps you strengthen your expertise to identify patterns that are sort of useful in pushing your brain forward, and to more fully understand the problems that need the creative problem solving in your work life and your home life. And in museum work, one of the things we all need to be observing more deeply is our audience. That's so fundamental to the work that we do. And so this doesn't have to mean planning a complicated timing or tracking study. It can be as simple as sitting in a gallery and watching your visitors for half hour, 45 minutes, an hour. And then also you might consider going somewhere else outside your museum to observe other kinds of human behavior that might teach you something about your museum audience. So that could be at a mall or the gym or in a park or on the street. Just what is it about humans and the way they interact in public spaces, and how can that teach everyone across the museum about the work that they do? And I should say too, often we think of our audience as the public, right? But for some of us, the museum projects we're working on, the audience is actually our coworkers. If you're an HR director and you need to be observing the staff to understand how you can maybe adapt some programs to better serve their needs. So before you leave work today, you might consider just penciling in a little time on your schedule for some deep observation, and maybe even think about how you can work it into the things you're already doing. If you commute by train, for example, do you want to take a day a week where you just watch the people in the train car instead of reading? Or as you're out and about on the weekend, all of those kinds of things.
So number 5. Rainey talked about incubation at the start of this as a really important part in the process. And it's really hard, right? We're multitasking, overstimulated contemporary life, right? Lots of you may have read just recently about the idea that the French are contemplating legislation that certain workers are not allowed to check their email after 6 o'clock, which is right. That's part of about making a little more space in our lives. So incubation is something that we have to actually make time for. We can't think that it's going to happen. You have to make time for your thoughts to wander. And you have to figure out the environment that works best for you. I do a lot of driving. Sometimes I turn off the radio in my car, and that's a great time for me for incubation. For other people, for lots of people we've discovered, it's a walk in nature. For others, it's a hot shower. Somebody told us in the course of writing the book that what they do is just turn the music up really loud and dance around. Other people doodle to get their thoughts going, or they garden. And as a leader, it's really important at whatever level, and all of you can be leaders in your organization, you can encourage this time for incubation. And even if you're not technically a leader, you can also encourage it. So you need to recognize not just your own need for incubation, but you need to recognize your coworkers. If a colleague gets stuck in a product, which happens to all of us, encourage them to take time and space for incubation. One of the stories that came from, actually from Germany, was someone who'd worked on a project where the team leader, when they were stuck, would say, okay, we're all going out for a beer and we are not talking about this project. We're going to talk about everything but. And she said inevitably when they did that, they came back in the next morning with ways to solve the project. They'd been together, but they hadn't been talking about the project. They'd been talking about their lives or the news or whatever. But that helped those ideas incubate. So we'd love if people would share in the chat room ways in which you incubate. Where do you go when you need to have new ideas and ways to think about things? And so, Rainey, I'll ask you to share first how you incubate.
Yeah, so I actually like weeding in the garden. That works really well for me because, it's this thing where you're, and again, often, it's when your hands are busy, but your brain is unengaged. And so, I find weeding or doodling or, things like that. I'm seeing someone else saying knitting.
Running, lots of runners,
yeah.
Right? That's great. And baths and hot showers. And I'm totally jealous of those people like Maria who live close enough to somewhere that they get to walk on the beach. And a dishwasher, right? To kind of mowing the lawn, Rainey. That goes along with your right, hands busy and mind kind of empty. And I think it's really important to kind of think about how, in a workspace, we forget that, right? We eat lunch at our desk, or we appreciate you all being here at your computer, thinking with us over this lunch hour, but tomorrow do something different on your lunch hour and go think about incubate in a different kind of way. So, and try, you may have a way that works for you, but you may also want to try something new just to kind of see how it works.
Our sixth one, and I'll admit, this is a really hard one for me personally. I'm a perfectionist, and so this is something that's been a lifelong journey for me. But failure is so important to the creative process. So we really want to encourage all of you to get comfortable with failure, to fail and then fail some more and then fail some more after that. And, this is a hard one for museums because we operate in the field. But that's really getting in the way of our creativity because awesome ideas require risk and failure. If you're playing it safe all the time, you may make a few small gains, but you can't get to transformation that way. And sometimes it's really the failures that teach you the most. So it can be hard to learn as much if you aren't making some failure along the way. And so, again, this is, not about going from 0 to 60 in 5 minutes, right? This is, for many of us, a long-term thing we need to work on to get comfortable with failure, both personally and then also on an institutional level. And, one way to frame that, we came across this great quote in our research from Robert Sutton: reward both success and failure, but punish inaction. So in other words, we need both success and failure to learn and grow and move forward. It's when we're not trying anything at all that we get stuck. So that's something to think about to frame your, sort of your approach to failure. And, we have a lot of strategies in the book for failure, but just to give you a few here. One is about acknowledging failures more openly and trying to reduce the stigma associated with failure so that really the focus is on what you learn from the failure. How is it a teaching moment instead of focusing on, oh, this bad thing happened. Another is to talk through your coping mechanisms. What's the worst thing that could happen? How would you deal with, if this project went horribly wrong, how would you deal with it? And, sometimes that kind of planning can help, sort of make it a little bit more palatable. Another possibility is breaking up projects into phases and, prototyping and iterating so that you're failing and learning a little bit at a time instead of saving it all up all at once for a huge public opening where there's all this pressure, building up to the end. So those are some, possibilities for you to think about. I'm seeing in the comments here, Linda, have you been following these?
I am, and I think, should we go to the next slide and talk about experimenting and prototyping? So Josie's ahead of us. Experimenting and prototyping, whatever you want to call it, is the great way to begin to move progress forward. It really, unlike Rainey, I'm not a perfectionist, so which is also, we have to say that we're a great advertisement for working with people who are different than you. So that's another part of a successful creative process. But in this case, to reframe your projects as experiments. If you go to your director or to your board and you say, we are going to transform everything, you're setting yourself up to have them come back to you and go, oh, that didn't transform everything. What do you mean? And lots of not very good things happen from that process, right? You're discouraged. It's harder to get your ideas sold, all of those things. But if you think about them as experiments, and that they're small steps, it is small incremental steps, but you learn something from every one of them. I do a lot of exhibit prototyping, particularly with the interactive, so you can see some of that here. So that's the kind of experimenting that I'm really used to and happy with. And you improve as you go along. You try it on a small scale. You make people more comfortable. I found actually in my work in historic house interpretation that people are really nervous about changes, and it's really hard to say, we're going to redo the whole guided tour. That inevitably leads to pushback. But in a project I recently worked on, we said, let's just try, people would always talk about something that was kind of irrelevant but in the house, like the docents would, and then the visitors would. And we would say, and we said, just try mentioning that thing once, and then don't go back to it, and then see if visitors continue to talk about this slightly irrelevant but still in the house thing. Interestingly enough, visitors started asking more questions because we made that tiny tweak. So doing these experiments, whether it's about how you answer the phone or what your signage outside looks like, or what's on your website or on your Facebook page, however you do it, thinking about your project always as an experiment, and being, and I think Josie actually has a really interesting point about being gracious towards others who aren't doing things the exact way you would. And so part of that, right, as a leader, if you're in a position of making a decision about how you're going to do things, is letting people try things, letting people experiment. That's it's your job to push for experimentation. It's a leader's job to encourage that kind of experimentation.
Great. Okay, so number 8. We realized when we were writing this book that spaces can both support or hinder creativity, and this is a particularly big issue, it feels like, in our field, because so many of us are in these buildings, historic buildings or retrofitted buildings, where we're kind of stuck with spaces that are, very complicated. And, that doesn't mean there isn't anything you can do to make your spaces more conducive for creativity. I think sometimes because we are in old spaces or formal spaces, right, we feel like we can't change them. But, again, experimenting, trying some things and seeing what kind of flexibility and space that opens up for you. And so in terms of thinking about creativity and what kind of spaces you need for creativity, one easy way to think about it is that You know, you need spaces for reflection. So, you know, particularly for those of you who share office space with other people, you need some place in your institution where you can go and be completely alone if you need to reflect or incubate or do some deep thinking. And so, you know, what kind of space can you create for that and for your coworkers as well? You also need places you can go, on the other hand, to collaborate with other colleagues and share ideas, talk out problems, you know, think about, you know, how you want to design your projects. And you need spaces for inspiration. This often happens in our galleries. They can be really great spaces for inspiration, you know, just looking at the collection, but a library of books or, you know, inspiration bulletin board or things like that that can be really useful spaces for museum workers. And then also places for play, places where you can roll up your sleeves and get dirty, and that's okay too, where you can tinker with something or build a prototype, use your art supplies. And if all of the spaces are really formal and there's not this sense that you can roll up your sleeves and get dirty, then that can get in the way of your creative practice as well. So yes, it would be nice if we all could spend a whole lot of money and make our offices look like Google. That's not going to happen, but we really want to encourage you over the next couple of weeks to just make a few small changes where you're moving some furniture around or you're reallocating space for some other purpose, and see what kind of changes that might prompt you to make on a larger scale without really spending any money on it.
So here's Maria says at the Museum of Science, they have quiet time in the planetarium for staff. What a great place to go kind of be reflective and kind of incubate. So we also heard a great story from a museum director who, in order to encourage reflection, starts every meeting in front of a work of art. So some of these spaces already exist in your museum. It's just a question of thinking about them differently and giving up a little bit of that territorialness. Start an idea file, number 9. This is really about putting lots of ideas in the pipeline, realizing that some of them need time to germinate. You know, sometimes good ideas are not good ideas right away. They're ideas in combination with something else or when circumstances change. But what you want to do is think about this not just in a personal way. Lots of people, you know, you might keep your own Pinterest boards, or your own. Somebody shared with me at the NEMA conference their little notebook of ideas that they kept, whatever. But you want to think about this in a generous way, in kind of operating from the idea of abundance with your colleagues at your institution. And you can do this in a lot of ways, including some of which are really simple. Lincoln's Cottage, a really great innovative site in Washington, D.C., their staff told us that they actually just maintain, you know, a shared spreadsheet that they just stick ideas in. And it's just a spreadsheet. It's not, you know, it's not cool, it's not complicated. It's a document that everybody can use and contribute to, that periodically they go back and look at. Pinterest boards have already come up here as a way to think about it. But you can also just have it be, you know, a bulletin board in the place where people gather at your institution. You know, make your bulletin board, you know, wherever people get their coffee, not just that thing that the Department of Labor makes you put up about workplace safety or whatever it is. Add other things to that space and get people to start thinking. So, you know, again, it's really about that creativity comes when we work on it together. And starting an idea file, starting a shared idea file is one of the best ways to do it.
And Julie is here saying in the chat window that she collects all of the ideas the public program staff comes up with throughout the year, so that when it comes to that annual planning and budgeting process, she's got them all in one place to go back and look at. And Vanessa's here saying cell phone lets her keep track of ideas as well. Okay, so number 10, creative constraints. And just in case you're not familiar with that term, creative constraints, just to help you understand what it means. Sometimes when you're in need of a good idea, it can be really paralyzing if you have too many options. If the whole world of possibilities is open to you, you kind of don't even know where to start. And if you imagine in your head, it's kind of like standing in the middle of a huge forest, and you could go in any direction with no clear sense that one direction is better than the others. And so you just stand there for hours because you're not, you don't know what way to go, or you go around in circles, right, without making progress. So creative constraints can be really helpful in such cases because it's a way of framing your idea process to narrow down the world of possibilities into a more manageable chunk. And so you can think of it as, if you're standing in that forest, a creative constraint is like giving you a compass and pointing you in a general direction. It's not that you are taking a well-worn path. You still have to cut your own path, but at least you know which direction to head in. And so some examples just to make it a little bit more concrete for you. If I said you have to do this project with only $100, that budget is actually a creative constraint. And so it's actually for all of us, so many of our museums are dealing with very tight budgets. And sometimes that feels very oppressive, but you can reframe that as something that actually helps you sort of channel your ideas in useful directions. Another example of a creative constraint, you're probably familiar with these A to Z exhibitions that some museums do, where you have to think of an object for each letter of the alphabet. So that gives you this structure for your constraint. And one of our favorite tools for setting creative constraints is this method developed by Michael Michalko, and you'll see it on the slide here on the right-hand side with this acrostic. It's called Scamper. So there's a line for each of those letters. And what you can do is if you're thinking about new ideas for a project, you can just move yourself through this Scamper tool, starting with the top line of thinking about ways to substitute. So just to give you an example, let's say you're wanting to make improvements to your annual fundraising gala at your museum. And it's okay, but it's not amazing and awesome and raking in the dollars, and so you want to see how you can improve it. So you might just take yourself through this Scamper process, starting with substitution. Okay, so what could you substitute about this gala? Maybe it shouldn't be a gala at all. It should be a completely different kind of event. Or maybe the demographic that you're seeking out in terms of the people who attend is worth something to substitute. Or maybe the site. Maybe if you held it at a different site and you substituted that way, you could come up with something interesting. And so you move through all the substitutions you can think of, and then you move along to the next one, combine. What could you combine with this gala that would make it more interesting? Does that mean you want to combine with a different institution perhaps, or who knows what, and so on and so on. So, constraints, basically they narrow down your options in order to help you move forward. And so if you're having trouble moving forward on a particular project, maybe this is a tool you could think about, using over the next few weeks to kind of jumpstart you in a better direction.
And we said 10 tips, but we really have 11. Partly in the spirit of, in the introduction to the book, we talk about how in Spinal Tap, the movie, Nigel, I think, talks about turning his amp up to 11. He's put an extra notch on it. And they say, but it's the same size. And he's like, no, it's 11, it's more. And the idea is that we all can do more. And so our 11th tip, our bonus tip, is that you can lead for creativity wherever you are in your organization. And I think it's really interesting, right? In our opening survey questions, 83% of you thought you were creative, but only 53% of your organizations were creative. We believe that no matter where you are, you can put these tips that we just shared to use. and begin to lead from inside the organization. That then, our goal is to have, our mission, the reason we wrote the book, is that we want 100% of museums to be creative, and we want 100% of the people who work in them. And that really, what's really important here is that the tips are, they are in the same way we talk about experimenting and prototyping and embracing failure. We believe that if you try and put these to work. So, these are all things that you, not just waiting for a committee, not waiting for someone else, but that you can do to encourage a creative culture. So
those are all our nice meaty strategies for you to start on today to jumpstart your creative practice. It's midday on Wednesday, so you've got 2.5 days before you leave for the weekend. What can you bite off and work on today? So we're going to use the rest of the time for Q&A. So put your questions in the chat window. We'll do as many as we can. And we're going to keep this slide up with our contact information while we answer those questions. And also, since we can't do hyperlinks with that slide, I'm going to throw a couple of hyperlinks into the chat window for you so that it's easier for you to click through on them. So the first one is going to be the link for the website for the book. So you can keep up to date on things that we're doing and thinking about in terms of creativity. Then also our publisher's site, Left Coast Press. So there are a couple of different ways. If you want to dig deeper into the book, obviously the library, you can order it from Left Coast Press. You can also order it from Amazon. I'm putting Left Coast Press's site up here because that's the way you can get the e-book. The e-book, unfortunately, is not available through Amazon. So we want to make sure you know how to do that if that's your style of reading.
And so I want to start. Dawn's question is, what would you say to the staff person who feels they're too busy with their work to be involved in creative exercises? I think it's really important to think that these are not, actually, I wouldn't call them creative exercises. And a great example that came from a colleague, he and his staff were making some time each week to discuss the book. They were reading it together. And then he said one of his collection staff came up with an idea that helped shorten the time for digitizing their collections from like 7 minutes an object to 2 minutes an object. And he says, I don't know if I can directly attribute it to talking about creativity, but it was absolutely a more creative solution. So I have to say, these are not, think about the exercises framed, or ideas, whatever we want to call them, framed in terms of solving the problems that you have. Not in terms of solving theoretical problems, but in terms of solving the problems you have.
Yeah, and elaborating on that, because it seems like some of you are asking that same question in different ways, is that sometimes you can insert some of these strategies in without even framing it like, we have a problem here, we're not creative to solve that problem, and you need to learn to be more creative. Just add to the variety and intake of information. You don't even have to, sort of frame that as, increasing creative practice. You can just say, hey, look at all these interesting things that are out here, y'all. Let's explore some of them. Wouldn't that be fun? And, some of these things that are sort of small changes that you can make, thinking about it as again, you're not trying to go from 0 to 60 in a day across your entire institution, but to make some small changes that build over time.
And I think one of the things about these people who might not be creative in your institution and what did you do about them might be to really think about a way, those people actually probably have other parts in their life where they might be really creative, but they don't necessarily, you don't see it at work. It might be because they're not showing it. It might be because you're not looking. So, Rainey mentioned a curiosity club earlier in the day. What about if you just had something where people shared, over lunch, something they were passionate about in their outside life. I have a client I've dealt with where they're like, that director is really not creative. But then, of course, he has other parts of life. He's a great cook as a creative effort. Part of what you want to understand, right? We want everyone to understand that everyone can be creative and everyone can use creativity in a work setting. But part of that's understanding what else people have in their life and how they bring that to a table.
Or also that, really to understand that it's a way of working. Creative practice is a way of working. It's not like, oh, you're scheduling one day a week where, you're working on creativity and therefore it goes on your to-do list as something that you have to accomplish this week. That it's about sort of adjusting your habits so that you're feeding this creative process of 5 stages so that is fine-tuned and humming along in the background of everything that you do. And so, it's about, on an institutional level, how you can fine-tune and adjust your processes of working together in your environment to keep that creative process humming along. I'm seeing this interesting question from Vanessa. Is it possible that staff can get too creative? I don't think so, Linda, is my short answer to that. What do you think, Linda?
I think I'd say no, but I also think that we are mission-driven organizations, right? So I guess what I would say, if your creativity takes you so far outside your mission, then it's a process of rethinking your mission or rethinking how to put all that creative energy into really great service of your mission. So I guess I would connect that to mission. And I see Margaret has a great question about how does it, what happens sometimes is it divides non-creatives and creatives, by undertaking these projects. That actually is somewhere where I do think leadership comes in, is that the sense that we're in all of this together. The quote about rewarding success and failure and punishing inaction, that's a leader's role, and that's a sense, it's not about creativity per se, but it is about experimentation. So I think part of it's about framing it, part of it's about leadership, and part of it, honestly, is about creative people not going, oh, those other people in collections, sorry collections people, but you're often tired with this, they're just not creative. My suggestion for creative people is to suspend a little judgment sometimes, which is important for all of us to do.
Right, that sense of kindness, and also to really encourage, the small acts of creativity. There's somebody has some pop psychology book about instead of, with your family, instead of judging your family members when they do things that frustrate you, if you reward the things that they do that make you really happy and excited, then that, reinforcing positively reinforcing the good behavior. And so how can you, sort of look for the bright spots there and focus on the bright spots and focus on the ways you're all in it together instead.
So Elizabeth, thanks for the plug for the Journal of Museum Education, which is doing a multiple article case study on a new issue about the Columbus Museum of Art's ideas about being a creative place, and for giving away a copy of our book, which is great. We also, in the interest of self-promotion, should say also that we're going to be at AAM in late May, and we'll be holding at an exact date and place to be determined, kind of an informal creativity meetup. And also I'll be facilitating a session with amazing colleagues from Ukraine, talking about creative constraints in Ukraine, which, as you can imagine, are quite something at the moment. Any other questions? Or
we're also working on a book signing coming up in Boston at the USS Constitution Museum in early June that we're coordinating with the Emerging Museum Professionals group here in the Boston area. So look for more on that as well.
Final questions or final things that you're going to do in that next 2.5 days to get your creative practice started?
Fortune cookie message, there is nothing permanent except change. Yes, idea of creativity is about change. And again, small changes. Changes are fine. You know, you don't have to solve all of this tomorrow. You just need to take a step in the right direction.
And it's like I can see 6 people are typing right now. It's like we'll stay on the phone. We know it's 1 o'clock on my computer, but we'll stay on the phone for a little bit more if questions go through, and so we're happy to answer them. And we want to thank you all, great participants, I have to say. It's been really wonderful to see all of you, you know, sharing your ideas. There's some great. I learned some new things in the chat room, and I hope you did it as well.
I also from NEMA. I also want to thank you guys for presenting today. It was a lot of fun. I definitely learned quite a bit. And I also want to thank our sponsor. I think I forgot to thank them earlier. Museum Trek from Trek Solver was our sponsor today for our lunch with NEMA. And I'm just going to plug our next one is on grant writing at the last Wednesday in May. So please join us there. And I want to thank you guys both and also everybody for participating. We definitely had a lot of people from outside the region, which was great this time.
Yay, NEMA!
Yes, and thank you, Heather, for putting this all together, which was really great. It's been really fun to do.
All right, go out and create, y'all. Believe in you.